I'm Glenn Campbell, coming to you from the future. The future looks pretty bleak, I'll tell you that, because there aren't enough babies, and without enough babies, everything is going to collapse. In this video, I'm going to talk about why people don't want babies, why they're not reproducing the way they used to, and why it's so difficult for any government to get them to reproduce. They just don't want to do it. And we're also going to talk about what you would need to do in some utopian future to try to get people to reproduce again, because obviously it has to happen. If each generation just has half as many children as the previous generation, then very quickly, within a few generations, you lose the ability to sustain your society at all. You just don't have enough people. This is what's happening in Japan today. It's losing 1 million people every couple of years. And if you've only got 130 million people to begin with, the population is going to dwindle away to nothing until there really is no such thing as Japan. There's no coherent society called Japan anymore. So why don't people want children? Well, it's really pretty simple. They're just so costly. They're so expensive to raise children in many different ways. Expensive in terms of money, expensive in terms of time, and lost opportunities, other things you could be doing. And they're extremely expensive in terms of risk, in terms of liability. In other words, if something goes wrong with your child in birth or during his childhood, and he's crippled, you are responsible for that child for the rest of his life and the rest of your life. You're taking care of that child. So the risks are huge, the costs are huge, the societal support is minimal. If you decide to have a baby, you're 100% responsible for that baby. More so in America than in other countries, in countries of Europe, for example, where they have a few more services for parents. But largely, you are completely responsible for this life that you created. So it's entirely understandable that people would not want to do it. In the 1960s, we gave them the option. We gave them birth control. There was a fear back then that humans, like other animals, are just going to reproduce to their maximum capability, which is true for mice or cockroaches. It's not true for humans. If you give them the option to not have babies, they're going to use it because they've got big brains and they can work out that it's better to not have children, that your life is going to be a lot less complicated and a lot less costly if you don't have children. Now, this was not always the case in human history. There was a time when children made sense. For one thing, you couldn't have sex without children. So if you wanted sex, then you had to be prepared for the pitter-patter of little feet. Children were also a labor source. If you had a family farm and you had 8 or 9 children, those were workers on your family farm. Children were also the early form of a retirement plan. So if you had a lot of children, you knew that you would be cared for in your older years by your children because that was their obligation. Now none of that is really true. We don't use children for labor anymore. And children aren't expected to take full responsibility for their parents in their old age. The parents are supposed to set themselves up with their own retirement plan. And the children are just going to come and visit. The children are going to go off to different parts of the world to pursue their careers, and they'll just come back to visit on occasion. That's the way things are now. So you as a parent aren't gaining any economic benefit from having children. Yet the costs are absolutely astounding. Now, I've heard it said that in America it costs $500,000 to raise a child, and that's speculative. It could be more, it could be less, but it's a lot of money that you would not have to generate otherwise. If you just had yourself to take care of, you can live a very simple life. If you've got a kid to take care of, suddenly your life is orders of magnitude more complicated. Probably the thing that most encourages me not to have children is the huge risk involved, the liabilities involved, in that if anything that goes wrong, it's your responsibility. You might get a little bit of help. If your child is disabled, you might get a little bit of help from the state, but largely you're on your own. You're throwing the dice and spinning a big roulette wheel, where many of the places where the ball can stop are bad things. You would never engage in a sporting activity that had a 10% chance of maiming you or maiming someone you love, but that's about what the chances are with childbirth and child rearing. There are huge risks. Just the risks of a birth defect could be 10%, could be some serious defect before birth, could be 10%, and then there could be a 20% chance of things really going bad when you're raising this children. So here you have maybe a 30% chance of something going really bad in your parenting experience. Who would want to take those risks? Now, the only way that anyone would want to take those risks is if they were shared with others. If the government, for example, were to step in and take responsibility for all those bad things that might happen. There should be some sort of insurance plan. There's health insurance, but there should be some sort of insurance plan where if things go bad, somebody else bears the responsibility. Otherwise, you're just going into this unprotected. You're engaging in this very, very dangerous activity, and there's very little safety net. Even in the Scandinavian countries, the Scandinavian countries will help you with medical costs and child care, but still, this is an enormous cost, an enormous risk. Why would anyone do it? So that's the key thing. People who can calculate the risks, project into the future and ask themselves what would happen if this goes wrong or this goes wrong. Those people, the more they think about it, the more they realize, I don't really want to get involved in this. I don't want to take this chance that did not have to happen. A child is a liability that did not have to occur if you had not had the child. Let's say the child is severely autistic through no fault of yours or theirs. They're severely autistic. They can never take care of themselves. You're responsible for them for life. This risk did not have to happen if you never had children. So there's nothing a government can do, a current government can do to mitigate that. What the sort of things governments are doing now is they're giving you a tax break at the end of the year for having so many children, or they're giving you a bonus for having 2 or more children. That's what the Russian government does. The Russian government will give you $9,000 for the second and subsequent babies because Russia is desperate. But how far does $9,000 go? I mean, if you're talking about the cost of raising a child in the hundreds of thousands, $9,000 isn't much. And anyone with some math ability is going to add it up and say, that doesn't change my mind. The thing that might change my mind is if the government stepped in and offered to pay the full price, the full cost of raising a child, or a substantial portion of the cost, like $200,000. Then it might be a better economic prospect for some people. But still, the risks, the loss of your freedom, your ability to just go wherever you want, do whatever you want, whenever you want, that goes away when you have kids. Now, don't get me wrong, I love kids. I really enjoy interacting with kids and sparring with them, trying to outwit them, as they try to outwit me. I really enjoy children. I enjoy borrowing them and giving them back. But I'm not ready for this huge lifelong project. And any sensible adult is going to consider that. People do have children, and there's reasons to have children, emotional reasons or religious reasons if you think that God wants you to have children. But the economic equation just doesn't add up. And the only way you're going to get people to have babies is to find some way to make it economically feasible for them. For people like me who are concerned about the future of society, but just don't have the resources to engage in this huge lifelong undertaking. So what are the solutions? I say in our current structure, in our current governmental structures and current economic structures, there are no solutions because the government doesn't have the money to provide vast amounts of services beyond what they're doing now, especially government of the United States, which is insolvent anyway. It can't step in and offer big baby bonuses or free daycare or anything like that. So current governments just aren't capable of it. And current governments aren't capable of discriminating about who should get this baby bonus and who shouldn't. Governments should not be allowed to decide who procreates. Let me make that clear. I don't think that any government that I know should be dabbling in human reproduction. At the same time, that's the only solution for humanity. That we do have to dabble in human reproduction. We have to find a system that encourages childbirth and encourages the right kind of children to be born under the right circumstances. And that requires a lot of discrimination that simply wouldn't be allowed in any modern government. So where do we go in the future? 100 years from now in the future, do we still just keep falling? Well, no, because at some point, some group will figure out a way to keep reproducing. It could be a religious group, a religious cult that decides it's going to form an encampment, form a community, and they're going to reproduce like rabbits. And if that works, they are going to take over the earth, this religious group. But there are other ways. The solution I envision is based on a space colony. You've seen kind of the science fiction story about the colonists who leave a dying planet like Earth, set off in a spaceship to some virgin planet to set up a new colony of humans, a new outpost for humanity. As a thought experiment, I like to try to imagine how that space colony would be structured, because it all has to be figured out before the space colony even leaves Earth. They have to decide, well, who's going to be part of our expedition? And what is our philosophy for reproducing and making new children? And how are we going to make this all happen? How are we going to decide who joins our group and how we structure ourselves? And once you figure that all out, then you don't even need to leave our planet to go to some other planet, because there's going to be plenty of virgin territory available on planet Earth. Let's say a century from now, I guarantee there will be plenty of open land, free land for anyone who wants it. Just in Japan, 100 years from now, Japan will be a fraction. 100 instead of 130 million people, Japan will be like 50 or 40 million people, and all great vast areas of Japan will be empty, and they're ripe for colonization. So you can set up your space colony without ever leaving planet Earth, but you have to figure out the rules. We could call this a fertility union, where people get together with the explicit purpose of making and raising good children to replace them. Right now, it's a low societal priority. For this space colony, it would be a high societal priority to raise good children and sufficient numbers of children to keep the community going. Now, to do that, you're going to form a club, and you're going to decide who belongs in your club and who doesn't belong in your club. And because it's your club, you started the club, you can determine who gets in and who doesn't. And you could conduct genetic tests if you want to conduct genetic tests or aptitude tests for each of the people who join your group. You're free to do that as long as it's your group. Governments can't do that. Governments can't say, okay, your IQ is too low, so we're not going to let you reproduce. That really wouldn't work in any democracy or even in a totalitarian regime. You really have to have a small little club to make those kind of decisions. So you start a club. You advertise your club and say, come and join my club, and this is what our philosophy is. This is what we plan to do. We plan to go to this new place, form a new community, and start raising children. And here's our plan for how we're going to support ourselves financially. And here's a plan for how we're going to raise children. Here's a plan for how we're going to determine who procreates and what kind of embryos we raise to birth. And here's our general philosophy of life. And if you want to join my group, you can sign up. And you can apply, fill out an application. And I will decide based on my principles whether you can get into the group, and whether you're an asset to the group, whether you can provide some economic benefit to the group. And then when we have, let's say, a few thousand, I'm thinking somewhere around 10,000 people is a good size for a space colony. Because 10,000 people can absorb the risks of childbirth and child raising. So in other words, for every 1,000 births, there are a certain number of problems, birth defects, or kids who go bad for one reason or another. Statistically, that's going to happen because that's our form of reproduction. Our form of reproduction is kind of a crapshoot. No matter how you conceive the children, there's a risk things are going to go bad, and a certain number of children in 1,000 are going to go bad. It's a disaster for you if it happens to be your child and it's just you and your spouse. It's not a disaster for a community of 10,000 people who can distribute the risks across a broad base. So imagine a cult, if you will, or a group, or a group of colonists who set off for Hokkaido, Japan, to form a new community. They move into a village that's already been abandoned, and they start their new life, doing whatever they need to do to survive, and raising children the way they should be raised. This is something that's going to happen far in the future, 50 years, 100 years from now, because first we got to go through our crash. Our society has to fail. Things have to get really bad before people are willing to restructure themselves. People are willing to get rid of the old way of doing things and come up with try this new way of doing things. What's to prevent this from being a cult? This space colony? It could become a cult. I mean, you can decide to form a group that's based on your religious teachings, or whatever religion you happen to believe in. You want people of the same religion who profess the same belief systems. This could be a legitimate way to organize your space colony. I'm not too excited about it because I don't want to see a future that's dominated by religion. But it's a legitimate, if that's the people who reproduce, those are the people who win the earth. I'm saying that intelligent people, intelligent non-religious people, can do the same. They can select other people who are like them, form a club, and start raising children. Anyone can do it, and as the world empties out and there's more and more space, you're welcome to try. Now it's getting dark here. I'm near the airport in Tenerife. I missed my flight, so I'm spending 24 hours here, longer than I expected, and I found the future. There's the future. Here is the future.